What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the first episode of Hollywood Already Did It presents Buddies for Life, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, a new miniseries from the creators of WandaVision, a history of sitcoms, so I guess, from us. If you've normally listened to the show, you know that it's about reboots, remakes, sequels, adaptations, stories that Hollywood does over and over and over again, and why they may or may not be doing that. However, in the wake of movies not being a thing in theaters anymore, except now they kind of are. We're getting there.
Yeah.
But there aren't any new ones. So instead, we're going to continue our episode by episode breakdown of the Disney Plus Marvel shows. If you were following us a few weeks ago, you know we were doing WandaVision and a history of sitcoms. Well, now with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we are going to be bringing you every week a recap of the episode, our reactions, our expressions, our thoughts on it, and then a time, a movie, a period of buddy cop movies and that genre, and pairing it up with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and dissecting themes and genres that Hollywood has done and is now doing with this show. As always, I'm your host, Blake Schultz, and with me today is Jamie Jarrett.
Hello.
And Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
Well, guys, the long wait of 1 week between Disney content is over.
I missed you guys so much.
I know. It's been so long.
It feels like it. That one weekend with nothing was just so hard.
I think it's weird because just especially with us with work and life and Thursdays that during the WandaVision run was like, I'm looking forward to this. I know I have this. It's going to be my midnight on Thursday. I get to sit down and I'll look forward to this. And having that 1 week where I didn't have it, I was like, what do I do now? Like I did actually cut on the making of just because I was like, well, I got to have something.
You know, it's amazing. I hated the theories. I hated Twitter. I hated all the crazy expectations we put on the show. And yet, when I didn't have it for a week, I was a little sad.
I didn't know what to do with myself, you guys. I've watched so much Modern Family. I only have 6 episodes of the entire series left.
How is that possible?
I've watched 11 seasons in 1 month. So I guess I like it. I guess that's where we landed.
Yeah.
We've come a long way from, I don't know, guys, this first season has some dice, and it does. I mean, don't get me wrong, but here we are 11 years. You're now caught up to like now. You're almost at just where we were
it's
a
weird,
year
yeah,
ago.
like all the current references. It's bizarre. Yeah, it was a month-long journey of like watching all these human beings evolve into people. And now I'm really sad that I'm done with it.
It's always any show that spans a decade has at least one episode where there's a jarring reference that you're not ready for. I love watching The Simpsons now, and they like do esports or iPhones, or they have a widescreen TV, and I'm like, what is this?
Like,
how did this happen? How did we get here?
Yeah.
Weird.
Why are they or like I watched a new episode of Family Guy for some reason, and they referenced like Deadpool. I was like, why are we doing a Deadpool cutaway? Did they cut away to the 80s? What is this? Why are we doing this? But we're not here to dissect television shows anymore, except for one, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So what did we all think of the pilot?
Jamie, want to go first?
I'll go for sure. I liked it. There was some of the writing I didn't care for. Some of it felt I keep saying this, but heavy-handed, a bit much. I don't like it when I really dislike when people befriend someone out of guilt, and then we have to watch and wait for them to like admit that they murdered their son. It's like the reason why I can't watch Dead to Me. I cannot stand like these kind of unnecessary secrets that you didn't need to get yourself involved in, and now I have to watch and be anxious with you. I hate that. And then when the girlfriend was like, or the that Bucky was on a date with was like, it's so terrible losing a son, huh? Can you imagine? And we're like, okay, I get it. But other than that, I thought it was great. I I enjoyed seeing Bucky and Sam again. I think by the end of this, I'm gonna have like a big crush on Bucky. I think that's where I'm headed. I love a sad boy who just wants to reform. I'm a sucker for that. But the big thing was the end. That's what got me, because I felt it when Wyatt Russell walked out as Captain America. I wanted to punch somebody. Like, they did a good job of making me angry in that moment.
Yeah, I connected to that a lot. It's funny. I agree with some of the Bucky stuff felt a little bit heavy handed. Especially like they were definitely telegraphing, like, oh, cool, he's the one responsible for his son's death. We got it. Thanks. You don't have to be this. You're literally pointing arrows to, like, look at us. This is what we're doing. We're so creative. Whereas I think Sam's side was a little bit more nuanced. I liked pretty much everything that he had going on with his. Specifically, the two things that stuck out to me the most was, as a black man, it was clear to me, and that's why I was glad that Rhodey was there. But it was clear to me that when he was giving up that shield, Rhodey was like, "Hold on, I don't know if you should be doing this, because he gave this to you, and you have something to make this your own. But I know how the government works." The second you give this to them, they're like, "Cool, we're gonna go give this to some random white dude because it'll be a better sell than you." And I was like, "Oh, that's gross." And then the ending happening and that hits. But the part that hit me the most was the with him trying to get a loan. That just, on multiple levels. One, it's on the Marvel side of it. You're like, yeah, that is true. These guys have been gone for 5 years. They don't have any work history or credit history for the last 5 years. It's going to be hard to get that type of stuff. But also, he's black. The elephant in the room. It's very, very, very rare that black people are given equity and loans like that. So it's a twofold thing. And I know people have been kind of going on like, why didn't Stark pay these folks? Not Stark's job, guys. Stop that. But
I did struggle thinking, like, how can an Avenger not afford a fishing boat? But then, like, as the week went on and responses came, I'm like, okay, I will buy this. But at first, I'm like, the man just saved the world. There's not a like, he's not asking for much. He just wants
it's a weird thing. And I mean, that's what we're going to sort of get with these type of shows. It's a weird thing that this is being brought up now, because I think it's one of those things that we always sort of just ignored. It's sort of how when like characters always exist, you're like, oh, we don't worry about them going to the bathroom and doing all that stuff. All the stuff that is kind of day to day, we don't really concern ourselves with. So now to bring it up after 20 some plus films and the second series seems a bit weird, but I am glad they're going there, because it's like, oh, this opens up new questions that we didn't get to play with before.
Well, I think we're seeing the next big question of these worlds. And as they get bigger and more connected to our own, we start asking these nuanced questions about it. And I think the first time we really did that with this genre in a modern world was post Man of Steel, and going, wait a minute, they just blew up an entire city. And it's because it harkened so hard back to national tragedies we've had. And we've kind of now are able to go, wait a minute, it's not, you don't get to just go walk into Metropolis after you decimate it. You're like literally breathing in people who were just lasered out. Like, what is going on? And from there, we did start to tell stories of Civil War and Batman versus Superman and the second season of Daredevil. And what are the ramifications of this? And these people are just unlicensed. And I think the next logical step of that is, how are they all paying the bills? Because you have to assume under the Sokovia Accords and when they're licensed by S.H.I.E.L.D., there's a paycheck. But if they're not, then what are we doing? So It is like, and Stark does make a comment in Age of Ultron, I just pay for everything, I design everything. So it's like, for a minute, he might have been footing the bill. He's also been dead now.
Right. He's been dead, and Sam was not pro Tony, so he wouldn't have been on Tony's payroll anyway. He was with Cap. He was on Cap's side.
Yeah. So it begs an interesting question that I think a lot of shows have to reconcile with. I feel like there's always a moment in, like, It's Always Sunny or The Office. Any show with like big hijinks has to have some, well, Frank has a lot of money. Don't ever worry about how we're doing any of this anymore. That's the answer to that question. And the Avengers just never did that. There never was they're not an LLC or anything.
I
Right.
have to say, it does bum me out though, watching heroes struggle with money. It's why Spider-Man 2 is not, I don't love it as much as most people, because I'm like, I don't want to watch Peter Parker just really struggling with money.
I want him to do the hero stuff. I don't want to see him struggling.
I'm like, I don't need to be reminded how hard it is to live paycheck to paycheck. That's not what I want when people are like crushing monsters. I don't want to be reminded of how hard life is. But I'm not to say that's a bad thing. I think it is cool that they're taking that route. It just bums me out.
Yeah.
It's challenging because it really makes you realize what we can do now with this blip is watch in real time how we respond to a world-changing catastrophe. The same way that I think our world is, and we're watching people reconnect with loved ones. And I think what I liked so much about this show, to juxtapose it with WandaVision, was that it was so unique in that WandaVision showed us the tragedy that happens to one person and the dealing with grief and dealing with these ramifications when it's just you. And Falcon and the Winter Soldier is showing us globally what is happening. And it's showing us this weird juxtaposition that we even do, I think, in our real world with like veterans or celebrities or anybody else of, oh man, you really did it. Can we get a photo together? I'm not going to help you. But
Right.
like, can you just flex and let me get a photo of it? Like, that would be dope.
Like, I'm a fan of yours. I am in a position to help you in some stuff, but I can't do that. But can I get a pic for my gram?
I love that. I love that whole scene of him like, are you kidding me? Like, what are we doing?
It's interesting because like I think post Endgame they just opened up a lot of doors. Like they just put the blip and people back in place. I was like, we'll get there. We'll talk about the ramifications of that down the line. But we're just gonna put this back on the board, and we know that there's gonna be a lot to pull off of. And I love how it's being done in different ways. Like Spider-Man sort of did the comedy tongue-in-cheek, kids just pop in, and it's less of a deal with teenagers and kids because when they come back, their finances aren't a big deal. They may have missed a year or a couple years of school, but for the most part, they can pop back in, and their adult stuff hasn't been adjusted. But you see in WandaVision, that was like a horror movie, her getting dropped back in, and then here you're dealing with some of the aftermath. It's just fascinating now how much they get to sort of play with all of that post Endgame.
It's interesting. We're never really going to go back to the MCU before that, where it was a little bit easier. We now really, which is good because I feel like they would have had a big problem if they were just like, it's fine now. Like,
well, that's what I struggled with Spider-Man, because I loved the Spider-Man sequel, but also it's like it did feel like things were too normal. But I mean, it was 8 months. I'm glad that we were going back in time a bit to see sooner after it happened.
And even that one had very weird moments of like, Martin Starr's girlfriend, she said she was blip, she ran away with this yoga and this hiking teacher or whatever it is. And you do have people like claiming they're 21, but they were blipped, so really they're 17. And I was like, there's a lot of more like silly angst,
and it's done as jokes, but it's actually when you think about it, like, oh yeah,
you get some of the
come back and your wife may have moved on. That's fascinating.
And you get some frustration in it. You get a lot of these students who are like, why do I have to restart? Like I did all of these classes already. Like, let me live my life. So you're seeing a lot of different sides of it. But it was, that ending that I think we've all talked about where you get the bottom shelf cereal of Captain America at the end that just comes in the plastic bag and it looks like Captain Crunch, but it's not.
I do love Wyatt Russell though, and I'm excited that he's in this show, and I think he's going to be a good swarmy kind of, because I assume that's where it's headed. I don't think we're supposed to like him.
Correct.
And I'm excited. I'm sure I've said this before, but if you haven't seen Ingrid Goes West, he's married to Elizabeth Olsen in it, so everyone should watch.
It's funny. There's going to be a lot of people talking about, oh, how I've always known about the U.S. agent. No, you haven't. Stop. You've not.
Yeah.
I know the name.
Right. I was like, that's all I got. But I think it's clear that that's going to be the impetus that sort of brings Sam and Bucky back together. It's like, hold up, you're stealing my boy's thunder, and I don't know this dude. If anybody's going to steal and put that uniform, it's going to be one of us, not this backyard dude that you found.
How long do you think before people do the whole Elizabeth Olsen's related to Mary-Kate and Ashley before the new fake Captain America is Goldie Hawn, Kurt Russell's son?
Episode 3.
Yeah, it's gonna
They'll make some weird connection with Guardians.
Yeah.
It's all coming.
Ugh.
The nepotism of the MCU is inevitable. But I think the only other side of it that we haven't talked about a little bit is Bucky and is this therapy. And I am a sucker for any short movie that just shows therapy. And I'm also a sucker when they just have terrible therapists. Yeah. I love this awful woman. Just like, let me see your phone. You're ignoring Sam. You have 5 numbers in here. You're a loser.
You are a loser. You're alone.
My God. Like,
Jesus.
I love seeing some classic Winter Soldier action. I mean, look, if you wanted the action back that wasn't really in WandaVision that much, this gives it to you in spades.
That Falcon sequence is nuts.
We get the Leaper to come back, which is great. He's moving. You would think those wings are controlled telekinetically. He is doing stuff. He's done more aerial expertise in this one episode than any Iron Man movie has, bar none. You get a classic Winter Soldier, just eerie Terminator watching him fight scene, this unstoppable force. It's going to be great to see where all of this goes. And I think that that's what we're going to get. I just really want to get to the banter. I really want to get to the silly buddy cop, Bucky and Sam.
I think that's where I sat when this was over. I was like, oh, it's good to see and put them both on the board. I'm glad they're both there. I'm a Blake and I love Iron Man 3, so anytime you deal with PTSD, I'm all in. So that's why I'm good with the Bucky stuff. But I do think, hey guys, we only have 5 more episodes. We need to go hurry up and put these 2 together, because that's where the sweet spot is, with the 2 of them interacting with each other.
I completely agree. So this brings us, I think, to the buddy cop of it all. Movies that people have loved for years. It's a great way to do action comedy. I think it's a great genre to build in some interesting themes to deal with. There's always not like a will they, won't they sexually, but like a friendship will they, won't.
Except Tango and Cash, which I will go to my grave saying is the gayest movie ever made. And my dream is to write a sequel and Stallone and Stallone. And also let me make them gay in the sequel. That's my dream. Just putting that out in the universe if anybody knows them and wants to.
So then, guys, what to you defines a buddy cop movie, and why are they important?
Well, it's like you said, opposites attract. They're always going to be completely different. And I personally prefer when there's the humor element. And it doesn't even always, it's mostly cops, but it doesn't have to be cops. And the genre has changed a lot, but I think a big thing, which I think comes back to Falcon and the Winter Soldier, a big brunt of these movies are a black man and a white man, and how their methods differ and their history differs.
Different ethnicities typically is where you get the sweet spot of that, like black or white, or even like Rush Hour, where it's black and Asian, like where they're not a 1-to-1, it usually is where you find the money spot of all of that. I also think it sucks, but it's also typically the same sex pairings, because typically when you do alternate sex, it automatically is like, will they, won't they, is it a sexual? It becomes like a love story as opposed to the buddy cop. Tessa and Chris Hemsworth might be the only ones that are sort of can kind of recently get away with being opposite sex, like, oh, they're not sexual, they're just friends, and that. But for the most part, it's usually the same sex folks. But yeah, one person is quote unquote the straight man, and the other person's the wild card. I won't say funny person, because it's not always comedy, but they're like the wild card. I think like Lethal Weapon, Mel Gibson is definitely the wild card of that group. He's not necessarily the funny man, but he's like a loose cannon a bit.
Right.
And you sort of need that loose cannon.
Movie, it's more dramatic. He gets
right.
It all gets
he gets there. It all gets nuts. Yeah.
Once you add Joe Pesci in the mix,
it just becomes, and then Chris Rock, you're like, okay, we're now a comedy. We stop putting
first movie, he's like got a gun in his mouth.
Oh yeah, he's like about to kill himself.
He almost kills himself like a couple times in that.
The actual script for that originally had him killing himself. Like the original script was him going to kill himself, and they were like,
Hollywood loves a franchise.
They were like, we got money here. We're not leaving money on the table.
Death in a film? No. We're gonna bring back every Marvel character. I completely agree. I think it's interesting, one, that we call it buddy cop, and two, that it's so heavily associated with comedy now. Because Jamie is right. It really is more of the pairing of two, like almost a Romeo and Juliet clash of like, well, this gang and this gang, and they have to work together to do a common goal. Because I think now, especially, it's a lot harder to be like, the cops are the fun ones. If it ever was easy to do. And so I think you're getting more things like Falcon and the Winter Soldier and hundreds of others. But the comedy really only started coming out in the 80s and the 90s, post Lethal Weapon, post Naked Gun, Rush Hour, 48 Hours, all of these, Heat, all of these movies that kind of started just being like sillier and sillier and sillier. But the first one that we're choosing, which is really the first American buddy cop movie, and I'm sure we'll get to the true first one eventually, is in the Heat of the Night. An amazing movie.
5-time Oscar winner, Best Picture.
One of my favorite humans ever and actors ever, Sidney Poitier. Yeah.
Which I am shocked that year was Heat of the Night and Guest Is Coming to Dinner were both nominated for Best Picture, and he wasn't nominated for either movie.
For either one of them.
And he both of those films won an Oscar at that point.
Right.
And I can't, and were they like, well, we already gave the black guy the Oscar, we don't need to nominate him again. But
let's
it's
not
like,
do it again.
Like, I can't believe he wasn't nominated for either movie that year.
Yeah.
Especially, I can't believe it, I guess, but you know.
Well, then now especially, it's one of the biggest quotes of all time. I think more people know this quote than they know the movie.
They call me Mr. Tibbs. It's so weird because that movie won Academy Awards and Rod won, but I'm like, they were a yin and a yang. Like both of them are equally on the same par. How he was not even nominated is just
crazy,
nuts.
It's really frustrating. And it's funny because I had never seen the movie before, and I knew that line, but I didn't know that it was from them. So I had that moment. I was like, oh!
Like, I know this. Yeah.
Wait a minute. That's a Lion King quote. How dare they? So yeah, the movie comes out. It's the late 60s. We're deep in the genre of the mystery, the thriller, the crime. Everything's very dark and gritty. And we have this movie show up and awards everywhere. So why is this a buddy cop movie? Because if you think about that term now, the way we think about it, and this movie,
so different.
Very different. We normally do. It normally lends itself to comedies. I think Seven is also a crime buddy film. But
yeah, I don't think we'll be ever calling that one a fun buddy cop.
Yeah, it's not a fun time.
What could be in that box?
As time went on, the buddies in question, usually like halfway through the movie, is when they become kind of partners, and it took Rod was racist the whole movie. I mean, kept calling him boy. He dropped the N-word a couple times. And it wasn't until the last shot of the movie where he's getting on the train to leave, and he kind of, and said his thing. And in my mind now it's like, well, too little too late, buddy. You were really awful to him this whole time.
An hour and 45 minutes, you were a dick to this man.
But back then I understand that, like, that, it was a different time, and they were in their mind, they were making kind of a he is a good guy because he's not racist anymore, which we know
Hollywood loves a story about a racist who might be okay.
Yeah. So but one thing about this movie I really liked was the direction. I get why it was revered. There were a lot of interesting stuff, and for an action movie of the time, it did have some like good heated moments, like where they're chasing the suspect around, and like the train gets in their way. And I'm a big Norman Jewison fan, who directed it, because he also directed Moonstruck, which is one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. So there's a lot going for it, this movie.
Yeah, I think, especially at that time, to do a film that is has such a poignant point and message that they're trying to do. They basically take a very strong subject matter, like a huge racial divide. It's like, let's make this a buddy film so that we can make this a little bit more palatable to everybody watching this. Because otherwise, I don't think this is a subject that we would broach really in late 60s. to multiple people at the same time. We're not having this conversation. So I think this is a way, and you take two just top of their game actors, like, because in worse hands, this could become very ham-fisted and kind of silly. To have both of them doing it is like, all right, we've picked two players to kind of put this on the board. They could not be more different from one another. And we're going to put this message out, but also hide it behind being a cop buddy film. And I think that was a smart way to do this. It's a great film, but it is still, even today, a very hard film to watch. Because unfortunately, while things have gotten better, it has not completely rectified itself. So a lot of the things that are in here still hold true.
Well, Terrence, if it was perfect, we wouldn't have this Falcon and the Winter Soldier pilot.
Exactly.
I spent that movie being like, I cannot believe this was made 54 years ago, and it's like, yep, cops are racist. Isn't that the same deal 5 decades later? Because the reason why he helps them is because he gets falsely accused of the crime because he just happens to be in the train station in the town.
Yeah.
And so they arrest him for the crime for no reason at all, and it's like, wow, it's that I think that because most of these movies are cop movies, and I think that as we go on and talk about these movies, it's going to be a theme for everyone. I know in Lethal Weapon, when all those kids are like hanging out because they had just witnessed like a crime or something, and like they like, the little kids like say to Donald Glover and Mel Gibson, that's definitely I think a major theme, and that works with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier because I mean, race is going to be a big part of that show.
I think race is going to be a huge part of this. I think it's important to note that a lot of the reason why this movie sticks around too is that it came out right after or around the race riots in like Detroit and Milwaukee, so there was a lot going on around this picture too.
Yeah, I feel like those tensions were high. We're kind of right around a lot of that movement in that era, which you almost always are. In almost any decade, America is dealing with its racist past in a different way. So it's you could throw a dart and be like, oh no, we were doing racist shit and dealing with the other racist shit we had done before. Do you feel that like that theme, like any racial theme or tension is consistently prevalent in these buddy cop movies? I feel like it's almost baked into the DNA, because to the earlier point, it almost is always a mixed, a black and white, or Asian and black, or white and other something. So is it always, does this genre invite that kind of growth, I guess, or dealing with those themes?
I think it just plays better. There's more room for growth and acceptance and learning about even your own faults and your own biases and stuff if you have somebody that is completely the opposite of you. I think if you have just two white dudes or even two black dudes, it's just not going to work as well. Now, it's weird because I think Bad Boy is one of those ones where it does work, but I think they're both comedians, or comedic actors anyway. So it's a bit of a different a case there. But I think for the most part, but even then, they're different than each other. One's like a street black dude, and one's like this fancy, I'm a super rich guy.
It's so a little bit more about class.
It's a classism type of thing, right?
That's Midnight Run is one of my favorites, and that's De Niro and Charles Grodin, and only one of them is a cop. And that movie is so funny, and it's kind of a similar, there's a class thing going on there for sure.
But I just think I know in comedy you usually get more out of it when they're opposite ethnicities. I think like Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor had a run there where they had maybe like 2 or 3. Stir Crazy, I know, was one of their better ones, but Hear No Evil, See No Evil was another, where they, just the two of them, comedic just out the wazoo for the both of them, but they gotten the majority of their jokes off of playing against each other's racial like whatever stereotypes they have. And while it might be a little bit dicey now, it's just like, oh, that's hilarious because the two of them are playing each other. They were in on the joke, so I think it helped that the audience was also in on the joke. But I think that's a part of what these films do, is like, yeah, and sometimes it doesn't even come into part the ethnicity. Like Men in Black is one of those ones where it's like they are completely, one's a young black dude, one's an old white guy. Sometimes the race isn't brought up, but it's just in there. Like, just the way that they act and the way that they permeate their just essence and their being. It's gonna like, oh yeah,
Well, even
I
Men
can
in
tell.
Black is also age. There's a lot of, I don't want to
Ages,
say
yes,
ageism, but
but it
age
is
Yeah.
correct,
differentiations in age and generations.
right?
And
I think another part of it too, of the casting choices is butts and seats. It's like we by making these two men the leads, we're appealing to more people. I'm like, let's put Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy in a movie, and literally everyone's going to see it.
Yeah.
There's no one that's not going to want to watch that duo. And 48 Hours, I feel like that's one that we'll definitely talk about more, I think, in the future, because that was a
It's one of the
game changer.
yeah.
so then how will these, I mean, we know how, I think, right? We know why Sam and Bucky are kind of already at each other's throats. But one of the other good things about this show is now we'll really get to see why. I mean, the reality is that Bucky has been a zombie for almost all of his MCU shows. He's the most like lethal weapon villain in Winter Soldier, the best standalone MCU movie, in my opinion. He's basically a MacGuffin in Civil War that doesn't really get to do too much. And then he's in Infinity and Endgame for a total of 2 seconds, and he's called the White Wolf, a name we'll never call him again, at the end of Black Panther. Falcon's gotten a little bit more to do, but I was like, now we can really see why these two have tension and what that tension is. And beyond that, I don't think the racial stuff is going to come from them. It'll be much more of the time now, which I think will be a little bit more subtle, a little bit more America not liking its symbols to be anything other than white people.
Yeah. It's interesting because I mean I don't think the race will come up much in between the two of them, but it could because it's funny if you really think about Bucky when he was on ice before he left before he was that world didn't really have that many people that looked like Sam before he was put on ice.
Yeah, they have the old dynamic. Like he's old. He's an old man. He's 106 years old.
Right. So then he comes back and he's still half killer, half not. So until he gets the time on Wakanda, he's really not around black people. And it's fascinating that he even throws in when his therapy session, like the only time that I felt calm and at peace is when I was in Wakanda. So maybe that does come in. Maybe he is a part of it. Was like I did notice that. Or I don't care
T'Challa
about
showed
that.
up with that metal arm and said war was on its way.
And
couldn't
then he
even
just
let
broke
me have a
all of
week.
that. Right, I couldn't even get a week off. He's like back in.
And I think some of the other tension is going to come from their relationship with Cap. We know at the end of Endgame that he gave the shield to Sam, but there could be a little bit of Bucky being like, well, I knew him. And I think that's where the weight of this symbol is something that's ingrained in Bucky and ingrained in Sam in different ways.
I don't know why I think this. I feel like I read this somewhere. I don't, but I feel like Cap went to Bucky first and like talked to him about it first.
That's a prevailing theory, I think.
And I think especially because when Cap was leaving, Bucky said like, I can't believe you're going. Like he knew before he left that he was going. So I don't think that Sam getting the shield was a shock to Bucky. I think he knew it was coming. It
seemed like when Bucky and Sam were standing together, they saw old man Cap on the bench. That Bucky sort of just gave him the you go talk to him because it is believed that I think Steve already sort of spoke to him and told him where this was headed. And I feel like he should sort of know that is where it's headed because in this universe, you still can be triggered by just saying like 5 words together real quick. You might go murder everybody.
I'm sure that's going to come up. I also love this idea of this villain group that just liked it better when it was blipped. That was like something else we didn't touch on.
So it's so great. Like I was like, oh yeah, because I mean it's a small line that's in Endgame when Steve goes to talk to Widow and he's like, oh, the waters are much clearer. She's like, don't you dare say that it's better with half these people out. But there would be a contingent of people who are like, yo, traffic was clear. It was so much easier when half the population was gone.
I mean, look at week 1 of the pandemic. You knew there were people who were like, it took me 10 minutes to get to work today. And goodness knows there's going to be folks who have designed their work from home who, when they're then told to go back to the office, are going to be like, no. I don't think anybody will be like, it was better when we were in fear, but there's definitely the world changes. And this is the extreme of that I think is very interesting. So it'll be cool to see where it goes. I like that we're getting a show that's going to deal with, very, very real things going on, and that's going to be connected to a genre that has been prevalent in Hollywood for decades now and has, like the MCU, spanned from being like very serious in tone and kind of silly in tone. So it'll be fun to watch the show play with that because the bits are coming.
That's what I want. I just want them to joke.
I do. I want the bits.
That's one of the reasons I love Civil War is all the banter and stuff in there, and they have some of the best lines in that movie.
Just the look they give when Sharon and Steve kiss is just, it's fantastic. I still say, oh yeah, and that was when my brain was like, I want to see them just hang out together just all the time. Or the fight that they have with Spider-Man and the reaction is like, I hate you. It's perfect. It's perfect.
There is one thing I want to talk about that I just thought of, because I promised my friend Tate that I would use my MCU love powers for good sometimes, and so I should bring this up, and I think it all comes together. When we talked about doing this show, we talked about how, if we talk about buddy cop movies, there is the propaganda of it all. It's a great genre, but it sheds good light on cops, and in a way, Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Marvel, there's military propaganda happening. I mean, Marvel literally has a contract with the military that they can't really say bad things about the military, and I don't really look at Marvel as propaganda, unlike my friend who I just mentioned. I don't watch these shows and think, the military is the best, but I do think it's worth noting that that there is a correlation, I think, between the cops and the military and the way that they are all represented in these types of shows.
Yeah, I think when you look at Disney's history alone with propaganda in the United States government, you go back to the 40s, where they had the good neighbor policy, which is a policy that extended beyond the 40s. But in the 40s, right before our involvement in World War II, they sort of set Walt Disney down and said, you got to go around the world. You got to go to these other countries. We don't want them to become fascist. We don't want them to join the Axis. And then make some cartoons that, put them in good light and help us make good connections with these countries. Some of those examples are the classic Donald Duck cartoon when he's in Nazi uniforms. Another example that Terrence and I just talked about on another podcast is the Three Caballeros. And so it's interesting when you look at this lens of what's kind of going on in the MCU, what goes on with Hollywood in general and the military, and I think even storytelling. But it's hard to ignore that Disney has a very big history with literal propaganda. And it's a very hard thing to pin down, because I think when we think of propaganda, we think 40s, 60s, every barabond is a bullet in the gun of a ba, you got to do it. And we don't really live in that rah climate anymore. Not that I think the military is holistically bad, or that I even think the police force is holistically entirely 100. All of this needs reform, but don't get me wrong, I'm against most of it. But to Jamie's point, yeah, I've never watched Iron Man. It'd been like, time to go sign up. It doesn't quite have the Simpsons effect where they have the join the Navy boy band music, but even, that's all in there. And I think that's something we're going to have to explore, and that candidly, the MCU will probably also have to, whether or not they'll really be able to do it. But half of how the MCU has treated the military, even as far back as Iron Man, is a middle finger up. So there might be some propaganda in it, but thematically, Iron Man 2 opens with him literally being like, the government can't own me. Civil War is entirely about what you can and cannot control. Endgame is about everything coming back and needing big reform. And I think when you get into this show, we're already seeing the failings of the United States government when they create a superhero like this. Even in WandaVision, they're the villain. They're fascists in Winter Soldier. So it's definitely there, and it's definitely worth talking about, but it's a very interesting topic. that I've noticed more and more people recently have started to really bring up in a post WandaVision.
Yeah.
I think everything, right? We've been grinded to a standstill, and it's made us look at a lot of our institutions and organizations and ways that most of us never had. I mean, we're seeing, and some of us had, right? We just talked about in the heat of the night was talking about things that we're talking about now. NWA was saying fuck the police 30 years before defund the police was a relevant thing. Eminem was shitting on the government. Music's been doing it forever. Movies have been doing it forever. But in the background of that, there has also always been a glistening light on it. Like you can never fully 100% shit on it, I guess. It's a tough line to walk, but we'll see how they walk it, and we'll see how we walk it.
Yeah, I mean, even as bad as it gets, sometimes there's always that comeback to be like, yeah, but wouldn't you like to be a part of this, or you should join this? It does become a bit of an interesting dichotomy. I don't know if we get into that much here, because at some point in time, this show, while it is dealing with government, I don't see the U.S. agent and this dealing being the big bad of this series. I think because he's being more used as a bringing them together, because we do all know that
he's gonna be more of an asshole, I think.
yeah, so we do know that Zemo is a part of this series, and he's going to be put on the board sooner than later, because there's only 5 episodes to go.
Yeah, we've got a lot to do, but I like seeing these conversations. I do, because it really, I think it's good to look back on all of our art at any time and really be like,
I think it's always good. I mean, that's why In the Heat of the Night is one of those two, although it did a bit more serious. But I think it's good to have these type of conversations put into a form that's more palatable to people that would not normally have this conversation. Like this is a comic book show that like we normally wouldn't. We're taking this time now to have this race topic right now, because you wouldn't do this on your own. And you're gonna watch it because it says Marvel Studios at the top of it, which we got you. So now we can kind of do whatever the hell we want to while you're here.
But I think even, you get outside of Marvel and if you dissect anything in any way, it's very easy to all of a sudden be like, oh no, like half of the stuff I like is reinforcing something that I don't like, or is advertising something. I mean, this is such a very odd thing, but we were driving to Chicago, me, my dad, and my mom, and we had a podcast on years ago, and they kept doing their ads, and all of a sudden my dad was like, I think podcasts are just advertising, and I was like, no, they're like really trying to do something, but also like literally everything is advertising. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in, is like there's still like product placement in these movies, and there's still all of this other stuff. And as things do get better, I mean, every movie used to be like, smoking makes you the coolest person in the world. And now we're like,
whenever I see someone smoking in a movie, I'm like, yeah,
they're dope.
It's fascinating to see when that stops too. Like you have to just go down the years, and you all of a sudden like, oh, this is the time, because now literally no one is smoking, where literally everyone was doing it before.
I think one of the things that I've had to personally reconcile with is I have had more and more conversations of like, the media is making things this way, and things like propaganda and military propaganda and its damages. I was a big proponent in high school, and I still am, of the like, video games don't cause violence. They don't make you violent. The music's not making you violent. So it would be a little hypocritical of me to now be like, it makes all of us join the military.
Sure, so but I do think there's a difference. And I think that the difference is in term when it's like military propaganda and stuff, is that these movies are being made in Hollywood. They're all American, and it's just that I think that people who maybe aren't as smart as we are, continue to see America as the heroes and in every single thing. And it's more about, I think, perception. It's not about making you want to join the military. It's about you thinking the military is a good heroic people who always do the right thing. And that's just not really true.
I think it also gets a little bit muddier, is that up until a couple of, like, that was like a decade ago, the majority of the films that were made in the U.S. were strictly for U.S. audiences. And now that we're starting to go across the seas and into other countries, doing all of that U.S. propaganda seems a little bit more disingenuous.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's interesting.
But I agree with you. When I was in high school, I was on the news once, and they asked me that question: do you think like violent movies make people violent? And I'm like, I watch Reservoir Dogs like every other day, and I'm not trying to kill anybody. I wish I had footage of that, of me talking about Reservoir Dogs on the news when I was like 16.
Yeah, like I saw Natural Born Killers when I was a teenager. I'm fine. Nothing's happening.
But no, you're right. It will require, like everything, I think it requires discussion, because I think a lot of the other side of these institutions is like, we did believe that the cops had our best interest. We did believe that the military had at least America's interests, and they don't. They often don't, and they're often going to do things that you disagree with. And I think people our age saw that a lot quicker than other people. I think we got involved in Iraq very quickly. We grew up in an era where cops were already, we were seeing a lot of the stuff we're already talking about. We were inundated with it so quickly that I think even it's why I think something like The Winter Soldier resonated so much more with us than something like the first Iron Man. There was a much deeper honesty to that movie to us. Not that I'm also saying that the military is a bunch of Nazis, but I think that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. You can, of course, leave us a review on iTunes, a comment on YouTube, subscribe to either one, whichever way you're going. Pick your poison. You can, of course, follow the show at Hollywood ADI and Hollywood Already Did It on Twitter and Instagram, respectively. I'm at, as always, Blake. Jamie is at Jamie Cinematics, and Terrence is at Terrence Tatum. Terrence and I do another podcast called You Can't Do That Anymore, where we do exactly what we were just talking about. We look back on old classic movies and get into what they did well, what they did wrong, if it still holds up, and what kind of is going on with it through the lens of 2021. I do another one called How Do You Figure, about action figure collecting. And Jamie, of course, is at comicbook.com and BuzzFeed, and is still on Phase Zero.
I wasn't on the first Falcon and Winter Soldier episode, but I might be on the second. TBD.
So demand her in. Release
no,
the
then
Jamie
I have to wake up 2
cuts.
hours early. If they don't have me on, I just get to sleep in.
I'm sleeping in.
Well, there you have it, guys. We will see everybody next week.
Later.